Thanks everybody for joining us for our March fire break. Just as a reminder, fire breaks are a great way for folks within the ANR and UC community to connect and learn about all the different fire-related projects we're all working on. My name is Katie Lowe, and I'm the statewide coordinator for the Fire Network. And today we're joined by two of our UC colleagues, Derek Young, who's a research ecologist from UC Davis, and Ryan Tompkins, who's a forest and natural resource advisor in Plumas, Lassen, and Sierra counties. So for those who are joining us today, Derek is going to share the results of his study assessing natural tree regeneration in areas that burned in high severity in the 2021 Caldor and Dixie Fires. And Ryan is going to explore fundamental concepts like resistance and resilience in forest ecosystems and discuss how we can incorporate climate considerations into forest reestablishment strategies and tactics. So after Derek and Ryan present, there'll be some opportunities for all of us to have some questions and discussion at the end. And then before we begin, just a few basic Zoom rules. If you're able and comfortable doing so, please rename yourself with your name. During the presentations, if you could keep yourselves muted, and then you can ask speakers questions both during the presentations or during the Q&A period by either raising your hand or using the chat function. So with that, I will hand it over to Derek.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. And great to meet you all. Yeah, this is really great opportunity. Most of my work is tends to be on Forest Service land and with Forest Service managers, and not so much on the state or private side, which I think is what most of you all are focused on. So it's great to be able to make that connection. So I will get my screen share started. And so, yeah, just to introduce myself, as Katie said, I'm a research ecologist at UC Davis. I lead a small lab that's focused on forest and fire ecology, and all with very intentionally applications to forest management. And then we also do a lot of work with drones and developing methods for using drones for forest inventory and mapping. But yeah, so today I'm going to talk about some results of recent post-fire regeneration research in Northern California. And this kind of ties into the reforestation focus of today, because understanding where natural regeneration is likely to be strong versus weak can help us prioritize where to focus our interventions like reforestation. So I don't think I have to convince this group why are we interested in studying post-fire regeneration. We all know fires are increasingly burning in these large high-severity patches, often leaving no surviving trees for huge distances. And in our California dry forests, these large patches are not something that most of the trees are adapted to, with the exception of serotinous species. Most species have relatively large seeds that are dispersed by wind relatively short distances, and they have no soil seed bank. So when there are no surviving trees nearby to serve as seed sources, the traditional understanding is that there's no way for the forest to regenerate. And when initial recovery is poor, when initial forest recovery is poor, other vegetation like shrubs can become established and dominate for decades, leading to a semi-permanent or potentially even permanent type conversion. And so this huge importance of forest regeneration has sparked a wealth of studies that have looked into the drivers of successful versus failed natural regeneration. And one of the key consistent takeaways is this strong relationship between the distance you are from a surviving reproductive tree on the x-axis in these figures, and then the density of seedlings that you find, shown on the y-axis here. So underscoring this importance of surviving trees that serve as seed sources. But there can also be exceptions with high seedling density far from surviving trees, shown in this red circle here in this recent compilation of thousands of regeneration plots across the West. And this could occur for a few reasons. One is long distance dispersal, just really effective long distance dispersal, hundreds of meters from surviving trees, maybe, or maybe delayed mortality, where the trees actually did survive maybe a few years post-fire and were reproductive in those years, but then died before the survey happened. So when they did the survey, it looked like there were no live trees nearby. Or another potential explanation that I'm going to focus on today is aerial seed banking, where the dead trees actually disperse seed after they die. And so to illustrate what I mean by aerial seed banking, seeds generally ripen and reach maturity in the cones during the summer, so shown here in this green shading, but they don't immediately disperse. That happens over the course of at least a few weeks. After ripening. So that's shown by the orange shading here. And so in that period between when they ripen and when they disperse, you have ripe, viable seeds sitting in the canopy. So if a fire burns in this window, even if it kills all the overstory trees, the seeds might be able to disperse after fire and enable forest regeneration. So a case where these non-serotinous species effectively behave like they're serotinous in this narrow time window. And so helping to support this idea that this could happen, we sometimes find mature cones where the charring pattern suggests the cones were closed at the time the fire burned, and then sometimes even with seeds in them, so filled like ripe seeds. So it's clear that fire can burn and kill trees and leave behind seeds. And this is not a new idea. About 5 studies that I'm aware of have observed high seedling densities with no live trees nearby, and proposed that this could be due to an aerial seed bank, like I described. But these studies are mostly incidental observations, with 1 or 2 exceptions. So it's still pretty unknown how broadly this occurs. And then also all of this evidence is from forests adapted to substantial high severity fire. And there's no evidence yet from frequent fire forests, which is arguably where understanding post-fire regeneration is most important, given these recent shifts to anomalously extensive high severity fire. So we were interested to know, does aerial seed banking occur in forests adapted to frequent low to moderate severity fire, where these large high severity patches are a newer and unnatural phenomenon? And a key sub-question to that is, to support aerial seed banking, is the seed source local, and can we rule out long distance dispersal? And then if it does occur, under what conditions? So here's how we went about addressing these questions. So we surveyed recruiting seedlings in California mixed conifer forests in plots across the 2021 Caldor and Dixie fires. We did surveys the year post-fire, and we specifically surveyed only high severity plots, but in 3 types of conditions. First, edge plots, so high severity, complete mortality patch, but right at the edge of surviving green trees. And then another group of category of plots in the interior, far from any, like over 100 meters from any green trees. And we split this into scorched plots where the trees were killed, but foliage was retained, and then torched plots where the fire was so intense that it actually consumed the foliage off the trees. The reason for this distinction being our hypothesis that the fire that's intense enough to consume foliage might be hot enough to consume or at least sterilize the cones that might otherwise constitute the aerial seed bank. And this is a key reason why we did our survey the year just after the fire, where it's easier to see this distinction between scorched and torch. And we collected drone imagery from some of our sites. So here's what this stratification looks like from above. The purpose of the edge plots is to serve as a sort of control so we can see what kind of regeneration density we get when we have this traditional live seed source present, and compare that to what we get in the interior. And then we also sampled across burn date. So the shading in these figures is the day of burning. So really leaning on the variation in the Dixie fire that burned across a couple of months and then we sampled plots from late July to early September. And we were especially interested in sampling these early burning plots, which we define as before August 1st, because we thought it might be before the seeds ripened. And so we hypothesized these plots would have lower seedling densities. And then we could use this to ask about this ripening, the necessity of the fire timing, as well as like some additional evidence that it's a local seed source. If the seeds have to be ripe locally based on the local burn date, then that's more evidence that those seeds were local. Then this also shows how we tried to pair the edge plots, the green circles, with the interior plots as best as possible. So here's what we found. So this figure shows the majority of our raw data with each point representing a field plot, and the plots are divided in each panel into early burning and late burning based on before or after August 1st. And so a first takeaway is quite high densities of seedlings in interior plots, especially the later burned scorched plots where the densities were really not that much lower than the densities in the edge plots. Although you should note this is a log scale. And so here's what that could look like on the ground. This is definitely the upper extreme of seedling density that we observed, but this is a site without any green trees as far as you can see, over 100 meters. And so this really does exist out there. Here's another of those. It's really unlikely that this could be explained by long distance dispersal from hundreds of meters away. Okay, so back to our same figure results. Another key takeaway is the effect of burn date, with the early burning interior plots having far fewer seedlings than the later burning. So helping support our hypothesis that the burn date and seed ripening matters, and also providing evidence that these seeds are originating locally from the fire-killed trees. And burn date doesn't matter nearly as much in the edge plots, which is what we'd expect in these areas where most seeds are coming from trees that survived the fire. And then the much lower densities in the torched plots compared to the scorched plots aligns with our hypothesis that fire that's so intense that it can consume the foliage may sterilize the seeds. And so this fact that local fire intensity matters is more evidence that it's a local seed source when we do get seedlings from these fire-killed trees. And then, so one thing though that you could ask is this contrast between scorched and torched, is it really due to the heat kill of the seeds or some other effect of fire intensity on site suitability? Like you get more needle litter in the scorched plots. Is that maybe why you see more successful seedling recruitment there? So to test that, we looked at whether torching extent on the x-axis here explains seedling density in the edge plots, that's the green line, where we know there's a live seed source nearby. So the heat kill can't be an explanation. And here we see no effect of torching extent. In contrast, in the interior plots, the torching extent explained almost a third of the variation in seedling density. So this seems like pretty strong evidence that the effect of torching in the interior plots is due to heat kill and not due to site suitability. Otherwise, we would see that the edge plots show the same decline. And then for one more piece of evidence that the seedlings originated locally, we quantified the local fecundity of the trees around each plot, or the reproductivity of them, indirectly by counting the number of cones on the ground. And we found that indeed the plots with higher cone density had higher seedling density. so presumably areas where the trees were more reproductive, more seedlings. So more evidence of a local seed source. So to summarize, we found what I think is pretty strong evidence that aerial seed banking is happening, and to a pretty strong extent, with high seedling densities in interior plots far from surviving trees, and especially when the site burned after August 1st, when the trees were not fully torched, and when there were many cones present on the ground. So all of these being evidence of a local seed source. And so then this begs the question of how prevalent is this? Is this just like a one-off anomaly, or does this happen, more often than we think? And so spoiler, I don't have an answer to that, but I can help. We have some evidence to help us think about it. So we know that a few factors need to align. We need to have a good cone crop, which is definitely not every year. Ryan and I were just chatting about how it's every maybe 5 to 7 years in yellow pines, and so that's not a guarantee. But and then we need good post-fire weather that's conducive to seedling establishment. Also not guaranteed every year. It happens most strongly when the canopy is scorched and not torched. That's probably the minority of burned area, of high severity burned area. And then the fire needs to burn in late summer when the seeds have ripened but not yet dispersed. And this last requirement, we were actually able to, we were curious to see how much area actually burns in this window. So based on our data, it seems like August 1st to September 15th is about that sweet spot. And so we looked over the past 20 years at day of burning within California, across California, and found actually that about 52% of burned area in California burns in this 6-week window. So this last constraint actually seems fire is actually pretty likely to burn when the aerial seed bank is present. But the other factors are definitely not givens. So the aerial seed banking, like we observed, is definitely not the norm, but might happen more often than we think. And so then some key implications include that under some conditions, forests might be more resilient to high severity fire than current models predict, with some really important caveats that I'd love to discuss if there's time. Does this, in particular, these stands will still have really high residual fuels and snags. And so does this really translate into resilience? But to the extent it does, it can allow us to target reforestation more fine-tuned to the areas where we don't expect this to happen, where the areas that are most in need of intervention and tree planting in particular. And it also helps to underscore another benefit of fuel treatments. So even in cases where fuel treatments don't reduce fire severity, and so you still get 100% mortality, they might reduce fire intensity enough that the seeds in the canopy could survive and disperse post-fire. So another way that fuel treatments might help to boost forest resilience to fire. So that's it. So huge thanks to my collaborators listed here, to Forest Service ecologists who facilitated the logistics, to our many dedicated field technicians, and very importantly, I want to acknowledge that this work took place on the homelands of the Nisenan, Washoe, and Maidu peoples. And finally, thanks to CAL FIRE for funding this through the California Climate Investments Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. I think in the interest of time, we'll go straight to Ryan. But folks, if you have questions for Derek that I don't want to forget, you can write them in the chat, and then we'll definitely have a discussion with both Derek and Ryan at the end. So Ryan, I'll hand it to you.
Let's see. Can you hear me okay? And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Hey, I'm just gonna say, I'd like to start off with, I first met Derek when he was a grad student at Davis doing some research up on the Plymouth when I was with the Forest Service. And I've always admired, he's a brilliant ecologist and is doing really cool work. And I think this is cool. I'm going to pick it up from Derek of like, when we talk about resilience of planted forest, what is that? And what does that mean when we're thinking about resistance as well? Because we know these plantations that we establish or our post-fire interventions will likely be challenged by more fire. And so what does that mean for a manager, whether you're on public lands, private lands, or non-industrial forest lands? I've started off with a slide here from a public and private boundary. This plantation is actually on private industrial lands. And you can see the very discrete property boundary between public lands, which was actually planted but reburned. This was planted after the 2007 Moonlight Fire and then reburned in the 2021 Dixie Fire. And so I guess my thought is whenever we have, whether it's natural regen or planted trees, our goal is to get them out of these very vulnerable early seral stages so they can persist on the landscape. And we do have this like statewide conundrum, right? Of there's in the 3 years between 2019 and 2021, 1.5 million acres of forest converted to non-forest from high severity wildfire. That represents about 4.5% of the forests in the state of California. So in a very short time, we're seeing this change. Our typical mode was always to do fire salvage and to replant. And as you can see in this case, it's a fairly clean site with some snag retention and was planted a few months after we logged it. And this was one of my first wide space cluster plantings that I did back in 2007. But the conundrum is right now at the scale and context in the state, there are so many fires that aren't receiving timely post-fire restoration interventions that we are left with these landscapes like Derek showed of snags, rotting snags over shrubs with maybe there's some natural regeneration in there. I've had some sites with some decent natural regen and maybe there isn't. Maybe it's planted. But at any rate, we know these sites are really vulnerable to reburning, that the snag and shrub complex makes a very unique fuel profile that is vulnerable to burning within the first 10, 15 years after the first fire. And thanks to Katie, this was some of this was a picture I took and or maybe myself or Brandon. And Katie came up and she snapped just the perfect photo. Again, this is the Moonlight Fire. This is about 11 years after the Moonlight Fire. Landscapes, entire watersheds. I want you guys to really soak this in, as we're not talking about small patches here. We're talking entire watersheds that are left in this condition of snags and shrubs, reburning. This is the reburn in 2021, immediately after the Dixie Fire. And so we're just seeing this this change happen at huge landscapes. So the goal is that our plantations can survive. This is a plantation that I established in 2008 after the 2007 antelope complex. This was reburned in the 2019 Walker Fire. So those trees are about 11 years old. Actually, this stand was burned through back burning. But we oftentimes use this term resilience a lot. And I think Derek really set it up right, and I really appreciate it. that in plantations, we're talking about resilience, but I think oftentimes what we're really talking about is resistance, is like being able to resist a disturbance or a specific stress or a change. But when we start to talk about resilience, it's this idea that these systems will be able to adapt and retain their essential structure and composition and regenerate themselves over time. And so that's why I think the work that Derek's doing is so cool. But I think we need to think about this in terms of when we talk about reforestation and what our goals and objectives are. I think it's really good to start to talk to our clientele about what are those. Oftentimes we just say we want to reforest conditions. Do we want to emulate natural regeneration? Do we want to establish a certain type of structure and composition? Do we want to expedite tree size and resistance? These are fire adapted species, but most of the fire adaptations that these species have are conferred by size. At the small seedling, sapling, or even the pole size, they haven't fully developed their best fire adaptation. Do we want to reintroduce fire as a process? I love this, expediting cone bearing capacity. And what's the desired time frame? And I think those are really important to talk to managers about. And at the end, I like this to sort of ground our clientele, and it's not all about structure, it's not all about composition, it's not all about process. You need to have all three so we can have proper function. By the way, this is another picture of the Dixie Fire, reburn of the Moonlight Fire. Here are some of those plantations that survived. I also want to show you some of the plantations that didn't fare so well. And I will also remind you that all of this that you see in the foreground was planted, but the fuel profile was not well managed. And so how we respond matters. And I will offer to you that timing is probably one of the most important things that we can think about in the post-fire environment. This is what has affectionately been called the wall of shame between public land on the right and private land on the left. And you can see the differences in timing and intensity of response. Now, I think it's important to realize on both sides of the road, there are vulnerabilities in the future, right? You still might have some homogeneity in fuel profile. I think that's really important to think about these plantations. We can't just think about them in the establishment phase. We really need to invest in active stewardship. Here's another interesting tidbit from the Dixie Moonlight Fire. Again, there's that public-private boundary. And you can see, at least in the Dixie Fire, there were some pretty substantial areas where some plantation techniques and active stewardship were able to mitigate fire behavior almost on the property boundary. And I should know this because I planted these areas on public lands that you see above the red lines. And the other thing that I think is a really interesting anecdote out of this is my colleagues who are on this division of the fire, they really, they focused their fire suppression tactics where they thought they would be most successful, as well as where they could keep their people safe. So they weren't doing as many tactics in these snag, snag-filled, brush-filled. They were plantations, but they were very sensitive in fire management of the fuel profile that they were putting people into. This is a study that I really we did with Brandon Collins and Ian Moore, Danny Foster, Scott Stevens. We went into some of these locations in the Moonlight Fire that were dominated by snags and shrubs. We were interested in how you quantify that fuel load, what you do about that fuel load, and how you reestablish forests when you have this backlog of millions of acres on public and even private lands that haven't had the right timing. And so what we did was we went in with excavators, we knocked down snags, we ripped up shrubs, we piled them all into burn piles. We burned those piles, preferably in the fall, but sometimes in the spring. That demonstrated some interesting fire whirl behavior just because of the heat that was being put off of those piles. We did both. In our study, we did a hand grubbing release and we did an herbicide release around those trees. And this is sort of what that final sort of site looked like. But what we found was in these snag-filled environments, you can have upwards of 60 to 100 tons of fuel load, largely of 1,000-hour fuels in these sites. And through our mechanical piling and burning treatments with some herbicide or hand grubbing release, we were able to cut those fuel loads pretty much in half, from about 60 on this site that I'm showing you is about 60 tons an acre. We were able to get that down to about 30 tons to the acre. We were able to reduce shrub cover from about 80% down to 20%. It's a very ephemeral effect. Remember, it seems like a big thing, but soon after that treatment, those shrubs start to regrow and they start to create that live fuel load that you have on the site. And there was a little bit of a bump in activity fuels simply because when the trees are this far deteriorated, they break up when you try to treat them. And so, but we felt like we got our sites to an area where we could establish trees with maybe a foothold so that we could do more fuels treatments in the future to protect that investment. And so a couple of themes I'm gonna blast through this. I know many of you guys have seen me talk about this, but scale and timing matters. If we're only planting 1,000 acres and 10,000 acres, is it worth it? I think we really need to look at these plantations as planted fuel breaks, where we have dual objectives of both reestablishing forested conditions, but also managing the fuels and managing the fuels at a landscape level so we're protecting that investment. We need to consider future climate exposure. I don't like to think of this as using climate change as a rationale for apathy, but I think it can inform our tactics. Managing fuel profiles. I have some lovely trees here that I invested in and would love to invest in, but they are not a good investment in that fuel load. This fuel load is really hard. I know there's a lot of excitement about reintroducing fire into these landscapes. What makes this really difficult is a lot of these fuels, you have this dead component, but you also have this live component, which is sort of a binary fuel. Like when if you try to get it to burn during the mellow parts of the year, it's not going to burn. But once it hits this critical threshold and low fuel moistures and in the hot heat of August and September, it will burn, but it will burn far outside of the range of what you're looking for. We need to start thinking about shrubs. We've always thought about shrubs as competing for water, which I think is really important, and this ties into timing. Because oftentimes on public lands, they don't treat shrubs until shrubs are a problem. And as a result, they spend more money and they're putting more herbicide down than they should be. Whereas on private, they tend to treat shrubs earlier, which comes at a lower cost, more effectiveness, and actually best management practice by reducing the amount of herbicide product that is actually put in that forest in its lifetime. I think we also need to start thinking about these shrubs, however, not only as just competition for water with our seedling, but also as a live fuel that's going to potentially risk our investment in the future. This is the day we planted this plug. You can see the shrubs weren't that big, but the root systems sure were. I love this idea of promoting multi-scale heterogeneity in what we do in our plantations. You know, there's a big blank slate out there. There's this huge opportunity for silvicultural creativity in terms of manipulating density, arrangement, some species maybe, and we don't have to do the same thing everywhere. The last piece, though, that I will say is, like, oftentimes everybody loves thinking about putting the trees in the ground. It makes people feel good. But if we're not cultivating those trees to maximize their individual tree growth, to grow big and grow thick bark, get their crowns out of the heat zone, and then be able to develop a cone that could actually reproduce another tree after another disturbance, I think we're falling short of our investment. And so if we can grow these trees to maximize tree growth, fire resistance, and most importantly, expedite cone production in our planted trees, that's where I see we could really anticipate, or in some cases reintroduce, disturbance to really promote this idea of resilience. I'm gonna end on this because in our forests, we always define resilience by uneven aged forests. But I think we need to start thinking about this with an even age start. And so we need to better define even aged resilience, or actually here I should have probably said resistance waypoints, if we truly want this idea of uneven aged forests as resilient in California. Okay, I'm sorry. I think I may have gone over. So I'm gonna be quiet now. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Derek. You both didn't go over. Folks, we did start, I think, about 10 minutes late. So we're gonna start the discussion now, but I know that formally we said it ended at 12:45, so you have to go. We'll send around the link to the recording so you can watch the discussion, but I think it's a small enough group where if folks have questions for either Derek or Ryan, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type your question in the chat and I can read it out loud.
I have a question for Derek.
What?
So
Go for it.
Derek, what do we do? Like, there's these sites with some beautiful natural regen. Like, what's in your comfort level? What's rattling around your head? What
I know.
investment is there?
Yes, I really struggle with this. Okay, one thing that I do go back to a lot, though, is thinking about the kind of more traditional prioritization of tree planting based on existing models, like the postscript model that Kristen Shive developed and others have extended, and that is focused on I guess those sites have similar issues of high, like without any additional management, you might have strong seedling regeneration, but also high fuels and snags and hazards. And so maybe I honestly don't have a good understanding of how well could you go in and treat those fuels and reduce them somehow without affecting the seedlings that are in the ground. Yeah, I don't, maybe you probably understand that better than me. But I guess that's how I think of it. Like, we're in triage mode. There's no way we could plant everywhere that needs it. So we might as well at least focus where there are no seed or weak regeneration, in the hopes that in some places where there's abundant natural regeneration, it will survive. And despite the high fuel loads that you described as being such a big challenge.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of those sites that we went back and ripped up snags and shrubs we had actually planted 10 years earlier. And we were able to find at that point, at least some of the equipment was able to work around our successful regen. And so I think I think there's an opportunity, and I think in a portfolio approach, there's always a slice of the pie of investing in some of those naturally regenerating stands.
It's cool to hear that you could work around the establishing seedlings. I guess those would have been 10 years old at that point. So like, yeah, I guess that's another question of like, when do you come in and do that fuel reduction? Is it like as early as possible? Because what if a fire burns in the, I mean, I guess it's pretty unlikely that it would burn in like the 3rd year post fire. So maybe you can wait until those seedlings are bigger, easier to work around without there having been much of fire risk up to that point.
Yeah, you might have that 10-year window, I think.
Okay,
You know,
yeah.
shortly after we did those, some of our sites reburned, and some of them did okay, and some of them didn't do so hot. So I have to be pretty transparent with that.
Yeah, that's the biggest conundrum I face with this work. So curious if other folks have thoughts on that question too, because it's definitely a question I have too. Or any other questions?
Well, let's put Rob on the spot. If your mic's on, how do you feel on your work about putting fire into plantations? Where do you see the fuel reduction opportunities, whether it's through fire or mechanical?
Yeah, it's well, you're gonna say, oh, it's Rob talking about fire again, but I do think there's a logic towards early introduction of fire. That's what I thought of when Derek, you showed that slide of all that high density natural regen. The logic being that if you catch it early, when the fuel load, like all young cohorts, they start out after fire, start out with low fuel loads, right? So I think it actually can work to start pretty early, like even year 2, year 3, to keep the fuel load low as it develops. And there's a huge challenge in terms of safety, right, with these snags falling down. But there's actually a logic to early burning there as well, because they tend to fall over, most of them after several years, right, like 4, 5 to 10 years. So I think there might be a sweet spot. You're going to think I'm crazy, but I think there might be a sweet spot like 2, 3, 4 years, and actually do a burn. And I bet you'd be surprised on the survival, because of the low fuel load that's going to be correlated with those young cohorts. But
Rob,
I might be.
Rob, this is Kristen, but I have a really hard time thinking you're going to have enough surface fuel to carry fire in those stands that soon. I mean, have you done that soon?
Yeah, I've done it in year 2.
In high severity, post high severity?
Well, the thing is, like, I mean, I think what Derek was, I guess in my mind, I was thinking of the scorching behavior, and therefore you will have a lot of light fuels because of the scorched needles falling on the ground. And I've burned 2-year-old stands, and I was amazed, like under pretty hot conditions, and survival was actually pretty high. But I think there would be enough fuel. I mean, I just like skied through the mosquito fire at Blodgett in areas where we have not done salvage harvesting, and there's quite a bit of fuel just from litter that are falling, scorched needles.
Yeah, I think pragmatically, when we talk about scale, though, I will admit that even when I had thousands of acres of machine piles to burn for reforestation prep, I had to do a lot of arm twisting on the fire shop to do the burning when I needed them to do burning in the reforestation context. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us in the future, because a line officer will always want to burn hand piles around a community before they're willing to invest in some of the burning in our reforestation. And so I think there's an opportunity for some advocacy on that.
Yana, did you want to ask a question or say something?
Oh, I just put it into the chat. but just sort of to think about what data do we have around second burns and what that does to seed beds, especially the shrub seed bed layer. And would it be a double activation point, or would it have some suppressive qualities? Like I can see gnarly things coming out, like with whitethorn as an example, but I don't have much experience there.
You go first, Eric.
Oh, I don't have much. Well, I just have a very like rudimentary intuition, which is like I think it really depends on how the interval between burns probably. Like you can see variation in burned landscapes where in some areas you get huge shrub response and some you don't. And I feel like that often correlates with past fire, like where were there shrubs at some point, even decades in the past. But I think we're talking about like the 2 to 10 year interval. And so I don't have a good intuition there. Is that enough time for like a shrub seed bank to build up, or for those resprouting shrubs to build enough energy reserves to survive another fire? I don't know. Anyone, Ryan, do you know?
Oh, well, I can tell you some of my experiences in like that moonlight reburn or in the chips fire reburn. Is the first burn really activates the seed bank, right? But oftentimes in that second burn, you know, those shrubs are 10 years old. All of those seeds have developed root balls, right? And so now they've got a root ball energy source. So when they do reburn, they're actually more prone to sprouting. But these seed beds can persist in the soil for like decades. In some of those sites that I showed you after moonlight that were like slicked off, reburned, we went back and measured our plots and our seedlings the year after. And the whitethorn, right out in September after the Dixie fire, the whitethorn was like all burned to little stubs. And a year later, that whitethorn was a 1/2 meter to 3/4 meter tall. It wasn't fun to walk through.
Do you think it's more cover? So yeah, like tagging on to Yana's question, like 2 years post reburn, do you think the shrub cover was more than 2 years post initial burn?
Oh yeah, totally. Because
Okay.
it was all resprout. It wasn't seedling germination. And that's where I
Yeah.
think we have an opportunity to work with our clientele earlier around the use of herbicides. Is like, look, if you're going to use herbicides in the reforestation scene, like do it early, do it when these seedlings are that big, so you can use best management practices and reduce application rates, reduce costs. I see way too many people being on the fence about herbicides, and they wait until they have a problem, and then it's like, look, you're gonna spend way too much money, you're gonna put on a lot of product that I wouldn't recommend, and then you're gonna create a fuel hazard. Oh, Susie has some nice, yeah, Susie and Daylin have probably some good perspective from their mastication paper as well.
No, I just what I said there in the chat, that I've been told that the more vigorous the whitethorn response, that's an indicator of the heat of the fire. So hotter it is, the nicer it pops back. Anecdotal.
Does anyone else have any questions for Derek or Ryan or the rest of the group?
I just have a statement of thanks for your time today. I know this is a short group, but these are all people that I really admire, and it's nice to see you all.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. And it was especially great to present alongside Ryan, who has really helped to facilitate and guide so much of my work in the Plumas region over the last like 10+ years. So this was really fun.
Oh, Derek, you are like a rock star. And you know, one thing that I really appreciate about Derek is, Derek, you're not in A&R. your appointment is not an A&R appointment, but Derek has come up to my community and given great extension talks. And I've always appreciated your the time that you put to supporting our program. So thanks, Derek.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you both, and thank you all for joining. We record all of our fire breaks and put them on our YouTube channel. So if you have colleagues or clientele that you think would be interested in this conversation, we'll send you the link shortly this afternoon. And then as a reminder, our April fire break will actually be on a Friday, and it will be Friday, April 5th. So next week, actually, and it'll be with our new fire advisor, Cleo Wolfley Hazard. So, and it'll be about fire and water interaction. So feel free to register for that. We'll send the registration link for that around as well. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.